I really, really hope it works. You might have noticed there is absolutely no Wi-Fi in this auditorium, like none whatsoever. So I hope it works. Online class, hi. Okay. Today's gonna be cool. First of all, how's it going? Good? People hanging in there? Also, two other random things. Can you hear me okay? I'm trying a new and improved face mask. By new and improved, I mean I dug it up from our garage. But is it better or not same? Different? No difference? Okay. Cool. Today we're going to briefly look at the concept of organic chemistry. Just like, hi, organic chemistry, what are you? We're going to talk about why carbon is special, water got to be special this week, carbon gets to be special today. We'll look at some functional groups, and then we'll have our quiz. Concerns, comments, questions? People, if you want to take the quiz online, that's always an option. You just leave once we start a quiz, you'd go and take it. But you have, like, not that long to take it. The online version has slightly different questions than the in-class version. The online version has more, like, essay kind of questions. Cool with that? Everyone's good? Sweet. Okay, so, living organisms, I now need to stay here. Okay. They've got carbon-based compounds. So, carbon is great at being able to form a ton of different types of molecules. And you want lots of different types of molecules to build a complex organism, right? You might have heard that before, like carbon-based life forms, right? Have you ever heard iron-based life forms? No. Carbon is the best candidate for these large, complex biological type of molecules. There are a couple of reasons for this. There are basically two reasons for this. But most of the stuff that makes you or any type of organism is using carbon as its kind of base. So proteins are stuffed full of carbon. DNA, again, that's carbon. Carbohydrates, that name might not surprise you, right? There's carbon in the stuff. They're all made up of these carbon compounds. So, carbon in your book and in chemistry, and just by convention, is going to be shown as a little black circle. It's just tradition. What this is trying to show is carbon right here can make 4 different bonds. Okay? So far, so good? Organic chemistry, is anybody in organic chemistry yet? Probably not? Okay. Organic chemistry is a branch of chemistry that's devoted to studying compounds that have carbon in them. So there are lots of options of elements, right? Organic chemistry, as far as I know, is the only branch of chemistry that's like, you know what, we're going to focus on one element and study what it does and what it interacts with and how that works. Because carbon is, like, very, very important to how the world works. Organic compounds can go from, like, little tiny to absolutely huge. There's no upper limit for how big they can be theoretically. And most organic compounds are also going to have hydrogen atoms. We're cool so far? Okay, so every living thing that we've ever found has carbon in it, right? All organisms that we can find, that we know of, are carbon-based life forms, okay? So for a long time, there was this idea that, like, okay, well, if all living things that we find have to have carbon in them, have to have these organic compounds in them, obviously there's something special about being alive that makes organic molecules possible. And so for a long time the thought was, you know what, to produce these organic molecules, these organic compounds, you gotta be alive. There's something special about being alive that makes this happen. People have since been able to actually synthesize organic compounds, so you can like make them in a lab, right? So it isn't magic, but it is cool, and you can understand the idea of like, yeah, there's something really interesting about these organic compounds. Everyone's feeling interested in organic compounds? Yeah. Stop me if I'm going too fast, okay? And in my continued ragging on people, nose and mouth, etc. I love you all dearly. I love my children more, and I also do not want to go back to teaching online. So, nose, mouth. Thanks. Also, sorry, I'm being recorded, so maybe I shouldn't say what I'm about to say. I don't want this class to be the one where, like, whoo, babe, right? It's gonna happen somewhere. I don't want it to be this class. Okay. You'll have played with these trains before, I'm hoping, in the dentist's office as a kid, right? The only thing good about going to the dentist, right? Okay. Or you had them at your house, or your grandparents, or whomever. Okay. When you try to connect these little tracks, you're trying to build something, and you ever got it so that there are like two wrong ends trying to go together? Does that make sense? Kind of frustrating. They don't fit quite right, because there's two sticky out bits. That can be a problem, right? They fit together in certain patterns because one side goes into the other side, right? Molecules have a similar, well, atoms have a similar thing, where they stick together in a certain pattern, right? And some atoms are extremely specific, right? They fit together only one way. Carbon is amazingly good at fitting together with other things. It's really good at making bonds. It's really good at making covalent bonds. It's really good about making stable covalent bonds. Okay? This is where it's going to be sharing electrons with the other thing. And now there's this covalent bond, and carbon's not super electronegative, but it's also not hydrogen. So it's not going to be these bonds are going to be fairly stable. Okay? It's going to make a bunch of stable bonds, and it's going to make 4 of them. Alright? Because it makes 4 of them, you can stick this together tons and tons and tons and tons of different ways. I'm not going to draw on the board because I'm trying really hard to keep everything here. Yeah. But I'll show you pictures. You can stick them together tons of different ways. So this carbon right here, I should do here. This carbon up here in methane, it's got 4 bonds, right? Is there any of these carbons here that don't have 4 bonds? They all do, right? Like, this one has 4. 1, 2. There's 2 bonds. This is a double bond, right? This stuff is amazing. Let me go back up. Oh yeah, that's just telling you words to describe pictures. With just carbon and hydrogen, you can make, theoretically, an infinite number of different molecules, right? If you have something like this, methane, a really tiny molecule, right? Carbon, 4 hydrogens, stuff together. Over here, ethane, you just put another carbon there, right? You have 2 carbons stuck together, and now there's hydrogen all over things. Notice the difference between ethane and ethylene here? Still 2 carbons, but now there's a double bond here. So you, instead of having, but carbon still has 4 bonds, but you just got rid of a few hydrogens. The idea's being okay? You can just keep going, right? You can be like, well, what happens if I have 3 carbons? 4 carbons? 487 carbons, right? You can just keep going. I'm going fast. Do any of your neighbors look very confused? Anybody who's like, they're not getting it? You okay? Great. This this is the same thing as before. Carbon can make 4 bonds. This is going to come up in your life a bunch. Carbon can make 4 bonds, so it can make bonds with lots and lots of other things. So hydrogen only gets to make 1 bond, right? So if a hydrogen wants to bond to a hydrogen, that's it. They've each made 1 bond and they're done, right? If a hydrogen wants to bond to an oxygen, which it does a lot, so hydrogen and oxygen can only make 2 bonds, right? So one of those bonds is already taken up, the oxygen-hydrogen bond, right? And there's only 1 left. Carbon has 4 bonds available, so it can have a hydrogen, and then it can have carbon attached to it, and it can have an oxygen, and it can have a nitrogen attached to it. It's got a lot of options, all right? Hydrogen makes 1 bond, oxygen 2, nitrogen 3, and carbon 4. We're solved? And carbon, I realize I keep saying hydrogen. Carbon can be buddies with other molecules, with other atoms as well, right? Carbon dioxide is carbon attached to oxygen. How many carbons are in carbon dioxide? 1, right? And then the 2 oxygens. Carbon can hang out with all sorts of things. Now, the carbon skeleton is the shape of that backbone of the molecule, right? Just carbon stuck together. You'll see it drawn often. Okay, I do have to draw on the board. When you see molecules drawn, oh hey, this is me from whenever I did erase it. I think I can see this okay. If you see a molecule drawn, I don't know, what's a good molecule to draw? Well, let's draw, right? Super simple. Yeah? You could start adding additional carbons, and then you put additional hydrogens on this thing. Great, you've got the molecule, it's beautiful. When you have something small, it's not a big deal, right? You just draw everything. But what happens if you want to have 10 carbons in a row? That's not that big of a molecule. It happens a lot, it's not a problem. But doing this for forever just is tiring, and it's hard, right? It's not that hard, but it's hard. What you can do, or what you'll see, is you'll see people just leave out the carbon when they draw pictures because they know you know it's carbon. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They would just draw the shape. Like that. And this, people would just know, oh, there's carbon at each of these bend points, and everything else is hydrogen. And then if you had like oxygen on it, you draw oxygen. You'd be like, oh yeah, and there's, oxygen. Okay? Not a huge thing to worry about right now, but just so you know when you see it. What's probably obvious, you can have a really long carbon chain, and things behave differently depending on how long the carbon chain is, right? If you have 2 carbons stuck together, that's different than if you have thousands of them stuck together, right? Even if the ingredients are basically the same. So with something like this, here on the board right now, we're just looking at carbon and hydrogen. There's no other atoms, there's no other elements involved, right? All of these are only carbon, only hydrogen, but they're different. And they behave very differently. Is anybody in this class convinced that boiled eggs and scrambled eggs are different foods for breakfast? Some people are like, no, it's the same thing. Okay. What about mashed potatoes versus like baked potatoes? Are they a different food? Not really? Drat. Okay. Help me out with something that has the same. I've got a new example on the next page. We'll go right here. about this. And I'll type it in for these guys in just a second. These two words. Yeah? We're cool with this word? Okay. Is there any difference between these two? What sorts of thoughts do you think? Anybody's like, they're somehow slightly different, the picture that is conjured up? Yeah? How come? I put an S there, I put an A there, I put A's and T's. Why is it different? Somebody's laughing, which is good. Help me out. Are we okay with the order? Even if you've got the same components, if you put them in different orders, they mean different things? Are we okay with that concept? Organic chemistry does the same thing. Just because you have the same stuff in it doesn't mean it's going to behave the same way. So if we're going to count here, how many carbons? Right? How many carbons here? 4? Still? Yeah, nice. Should we count hydrogens? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How many hydrogens are over here? It's 10 as well, right? They have the exact same stuff in them. Exact same stuff. But they're different. They do different things. They're shaped differently. We're fine with that idea? So carbon-based compounds can differ in lots of things. They can differ, obviously, just on their length, like how long they get. They can differ with how they're branched out, right? So you can have the same number of things, and they can have the same number of things, be the same size, but just different shapes. They can have the same number of things and be more or less the same shape, but differ with where they put that double bond, right? And they can also differ with how many hydrogens they have, and also things like rings. So things like these, they're different from each other, and they're also different from the others. Everyone's cool with this? Oh, right. The one that's tricky for people to see, it's tricky for some of us who don't do well flipping pictures, like, if you've seen those puzzles where, like, if you folded this box together, which color is on the top? They show you an unfolded box. You're supposed to look at it and know which color is on top. Have you seen this before? Or, like, anybody here a sign language person? Yeah. If you're watching somebody interpret, and then you're going to do it, you need to flip what you're doing, right? Yeah. Some people are great at this. Other people are like, I have no concept of what you mean here. Carbon compounds, and other compounds too, but carbon compounds can have the same length, the same branching, basically the same arrangement of everything, but still be different. They're called isomers. And basically what that means is your left hand and your right hand hopefully have the same number of fingers typically, right? Same number of fingers, the arrangement's the same, right? Thumb and then the other fingers connected to it. Same stuff, same arrangement, same size, but they're not identical, right? If you've tried to put on mittens, well, mittens aren't that hard. If you try to put on, like, gloves that definitely have a front and back side, you can't get your left hand into the right hand glove. It's upside down. Okay? Molecules can do the same thing. These compounds can do the same thing. So isomers are going to be where, they might have the same molecular formula. If you were saying, okay, I want something that has 4 carbons, 10 hydrogens, same molecular formula, but they can be different, right? So they could have different branching. They could be structurally different. They could be different because the molecules are on different sides. So if element X is over here on both of those sides up there, that's a different molecule than this one. Or they could be mirror images of each other, where, yeah, these two things, same, same, same atoms, same organization, but you couldn't put them on top of each other and have them match, right? Do you all like random historical stories about scientist people? Yeah. Let me look up a picture. I should have looked up a picture before. What was her last name? I believe this is her. Yeah, her. Um, this is briefly, I should have put better pictures. Frances Oldham Kelsey. She was a scientist in the 50s or so. And she was working for the US government doing her thing, right? Cool. She was working for the FDA. The FDA was really, really new at the time and was just kind of supposed to rubber stamp things mostly. Like, yeah, sure, come through. Anyways, at that time, there were some groups working out in Europe who were working on a medicine called thalidomide. Have you ever heard of this? Yeah. So thalidomide was a medicine that's used to treat morning sickness. Have you all ever known somebody who's had really bad morning sickness during pregnancy? Right? It's miserable for them, right? It can be really uncomfortable. For some people, it's actually dangerous because they just throw up so much. Really, really dangerous. Anyways, so this group worked really hard, developed this drug that treated morning sickness. It was amazing. It was this miracle drug. Like, it was great. It solved the problem. And they did some tests. The original tests, no weird side effects. It was cool. This stuff got sold in Germany. It got sold in the UK. It got sold in New Zealand. Like, it got sold all over the place. It was great. At the time, the thought, the common knowledge amongst scientists was, nothing crosses the placental barrier. So if the mom takes medicine, it's not a big deal. It doesn't cross the placental barrier. Okay? Cool. Do you see where this is going? Yeah. Dr. Kelsey had a different idea. She was like, I've done work with malaria before, and some things do cross the placental barrier, and we are not letting this stuff be sold in the US. And she was given crap about it. Everyone's like, do you just hate pregnant women or what? And she's like, no, I don't believe their data. I want to run our own. And they're like, you want to solidify your position and think you're more powerful because everybody else is fighting this. She's like, this stuff is not being sold here until we do our own stuff. Okay? And yeah, she was given a really hard time about it because obviously you A, hate pregnant women, B, don't believe other scientists, and C, just want to make your job cooler, right? She's like, I don't care. It's not coming through. In kind of sad news, she was right. The stuff thalidomide does cross the placental barrier. The weird thing is, one enantiomer of it, one mirror image version of it, is just fine. It helps morning sickness, doesn't cause a problem, right? But the mirror image of it, and it's tricky when you're synthesizing stuff to keep it from getting flipped sometimes, one mirror image of it causes problems. I'm going to look up thalidomide. It's going to show you a bunch of pictures of kids. They're somewhat upsetting, so if you don't want to look, that's fine. I also don't know how to spell thalidomide. There we go. Kids didn't have limbs. A lot, though. Babies started being born, and because of their mothers taking it while they were developing, they didn't have limbs. And then there was some level of, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't use this as an appropriate treatment for morning sickness. Yeah? anyways, on that cheerful note, the point of all of this is A, if you know you're right and you've got evidence to back yourself up, stick to your guns. And yeah, thalidomide was never sold in the US. And we're back to here. Notice how Kennedy is like giving her a medal, being like, thank you for not killing much of the kids, because a lot of kids actually died too. So stick to your guns, but also things can cross the parental barrier. But the point relevant to today is the difference between one mirror image and the other mirror image is huge. For dopamine drugs too, for Parkinson's drug, there's one enantiomer of a drug called L-DOPA that works great, and the other one doesn't. Point being, the arrangement of carbons and whatever's stuck to them is hugely important for what they do. Concerns, questions? All right, so it's not all just carbon and hydrogen. It's a lot carbon and hydrogen. A lot carbon and hydrogen. But it's not all carbon and hydrogen. There are a few other things that keep showing up. So oxygen shows up a lot. Other molecules you think might show up, like in the human body. It doesn't have to be human, sorry. I really like humans more than other examples to use. Lots of molecules can show up, okay? There are 7 arrangements of atoms that keep showing up over and over and over. And if you know what they look like or what they do, you can know a lot about what's going to happen. So like if you see a word, just in English, see a word in English, and then you see that word with an S at the end of it, what is that trying to tell you? Typically. You see something like, I don't know, chipmunk, and then the next time you see it with chipmunks with an S. What does that mean about what we're talking about? It means there's lots of them, right? And you can do this, I mean, I realize there's some exceptions, but you can do this with lots of things, right? You're like, duck, ducks, there's more of them now, right? Books. Knowing that the S means plural makes your life better, right? Okay. Similar, if you have, say, a verb and ends in ing, right? You're like, oh, this thing is currently happening, right? Run, running, they're doing it right now, right? Dance, it's the action. Dancing, they're doing it right now, right? So if you know ing is a thing, it means it makes more sense, right? These 7 right here, functional groups. Okay, here we go. These 7 functional groups show up over and over and over, and they're kind of like knowing that S means plural, or knowing that ED means it happened in the past, right? We're going to look at them all. They're worth memorizing. You're going to memorize them on accident, probably, but just to make sure we're not skipping slides. So, carbon and hydrogen all over the place. This is a carbon here, carbon, carbon, each of the branch points. Online people, carbon, 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 each of the branch points. Switching around the sticky on bits, the parts that are different. So there's an oxygen here, there's an oxygen and hydrogen right here. If you switch those around, it can change the compound dramatically. So this is estradiol, hormone important for, well, what's other things? It's a female sex hormone, or precursor for it. Testosterone, and again, both men and women have both of these, but the ratios are hugely important for differences. Testosterone, it's the same stuff, but you're missing a hydrogen and have a double bond, right? Oh, and you also have this little group up there. Switching out the functional groups is going to make it even more different. Functional groups to know include, I'm going to go through these really fast, okay? Study them on your own, and we're going to have a brief study group thing together here in class. If this works. I hope this works. Hydroxyl group is just saying oxygen and hydrogen. It's this little oxygen-hydrogen group that you can stick on things. It's called a functional group. This is alcohol, all right? So this little OH over here, stuck onto it, is this functional group. It's a hydroxyl group, all right? This stuff can dissolve in water just beautifully. It forms hydrogen bonds with water. Alcohol is going to have this. Carbonyl has this oxygen stuck to carbon with a double bond here, and it's stuck on. So we see it right here in acetone. We see it over here in propanol. This is a carbonyl. Are you now like feeling like you're in chemistry class again? I know. Have you guys gone through these in chemistry class? You're going to, which is good. You'll be like, I know all of them. All right. Look carefully here. You've got carbon double bound to oxygen, and you're expecting two other connections, but who cares? Carbonyl. Isn't this what a carbonyl doesn't look like a carbonyl? Right? Carbon, double bound to oxygen, two bonds. It looks really, really similar, right? This one's carbonyl. This one looks really, really similar. The difference here is there's an oxygen and a hydrogen. It's carboxyl. So if we go back up, we've got hydroxyl here, this OH. So hydrogen, oxygen, right? Hydroxyl, carbonyl. But if we put this oxygen hydrogen thing on here, we've got carboxyl. Right? This stuff acts as an acid. This stuff shows up in, say, vinegar, right? So far, so good? This is not going to be on the quiz today. Eventually, it might be on the quiz. This is just, we're going to see them. You'll look at them again on your own. Amino group is one, in my personal opinion, one of the easiest ones to pay attention to because it's the only one here we're worried about that has nitrogen in it. So when you see the nitrogen, you're like, oh, it's an amino group. All right? This is going to show up in protein a lot. Okay? It's got this nitrogen. And it can be disguised different ways, right? So it can be hanging out here in this amino acid. That's why it's called an amino acid. It's got this group, this nitrogen with these hydrogens. Right? It can look different ways, but that nitrogen, 3 hydrogens stuck to something, it's an amino group. We're good? So we've got, what, 4 of them already? We only have 3 more to talk about. The last 3 are probably, okay. Carbonyl and carboxyl are the tricky ones. The rest of them, you've got sulfonyl hydryl groups. This stuff, pay attention to the S and you'll be like, oh yeah, it's a sulfonyl hydryl group. This stuff stinks. It's the stuff in skunk smell that stinks. It's if you ever smelled somebody when they're getting a perm or like their hair, like a chemical perm, it's that smell too. It shows up in boiled eggs if you boil them too long. Do you know that smell I'm talking about? Kind of nasty a little bit. These make things more stable, right? So like the perm idea is that if you bend hair and then stabilize it with these hopeful hydral bonds, you make them thick, like you freeze it. This works for proteins. If you've got protein and you want it to be a certain shape, these groups help glue it together in a certain folding pattern. What I would like you to know before next week is the names of these 7. You don't have to really know what they do yet, but do know the names of the 7. Phosphate group, this stuff, oh, this stuff's amazing. Oxygen is fine to have electrons, right? That's cool. Not a big problem. But negative charges do repel each other. How many negative charges are in this thing? Okay, it looks like 3. Sorry, that's my bad. It's actually 2. This one that's over here, that one's actually saying it's connected to something else. Sorry, that was not meant to be tricky. I do need my stick. So there's two negative charges here, and this one that for all the world is drawn like a negative charge is actually saying it's just attached to, it's just stuck on whatever's being stuck onto. Okay, so we've got these negative charges. This is a phosphate group. That's got some energy in it. Those negative charges are somewhat energetic. They've got a lot of negative charge. If you grab another one of these phosphates and stick it next to it, now there is a ton of negative charges stuck really close together. This stuff, when it reacts with water, kind of doesn't go boof exactly, but gives up a lot of energy. Has anybody ever heard of something called ATP? Like your muscle cells? As like the currency of energy in the cell or something? Okay. ATP, the TP part stands for triphosphate. There are three of these phosphate groups stuck next to each other. You can imagine three magnets that the sides are such that they don't want to be together, taped together, right? So as soon as you cut that thing that's holding them together, they're going to burst apart really, really fast with some energy. Phosphate groups, when you see them in the molecule, and you know it's phosphate groups because they're the ones with P in it, you're like, yeah, phosphate. And a ton of this oxygen stuff all over the place. When you see that, you can assume, there's probably something to do with energy. Yeah. And last but not least, it's the least impressive, in my personal opinion, group, but it does tons. It's called a methyl group. It's carbon with 3 hydrogens. If you stick carbon with 3 hydrogens, it's a methyl group, onto things, it changes what it does. So, this methyl group acts as a tag often, being like, change this, or turn this gene on, or turn this gene off, do different things. It also, does anybody know what happens if you feed dogs chocolate? Is it good for dogs or bad for dogs? Bad. You're like, don't do it, right? Okay. It can be somewhat poisonous to them, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Similarly, if people eat this stuff, theobromine, it's not good for you. Well, it's you can't eat it plain. Anyways, ignore that. What we're going to focus on is the difference between theobromine, which you don't want to eat too much without being careful, and caffeine. The only difference is this methyl group. That's the only difference. It's very similar, but methyl groups change how things behave. Okay? Concerns or questions? We've had these 7 functional groups. 7 functional groups, they're important for life, they keep showing up, and if you know them, when you see them, you're like, oh, I know what that is. Questions about that? Sweet. In that case, I'm going to stop recording here. Goodbye, online people. Stop.